Well, this is a heads up that I think this is going to be a little longer than I would want it to be, but I just kind of wanted to cover everything that I've thought of about this, and it may be a little cut into sections and stuff, but we'll see how it happens. So, is it good to understand people more? Well, I mean, that is the common thing that you'll hear a lot, that if we understood each other more, then we get along better and everything. And from where I'm sitting, I'm not so sure about that. Especially with the world and the fallen state that it's in. I mean, there's a good reason there's only 1.5% INFJs. You don't really need that many, but I think that everybody could benefit from understanding people more. And, I just have to say that the people that I felt like I had the most in common with, in a way, was like, I remember I was in New York City and like we saw some gang members on the metro, and I've seen some people that have been in from that kind of background, that sort of thing, similar sort of thing, and they see what's under the surface in people, be it good or bad, because they're in a lifestyle that has a lot of pressure and it brings out what's under the surface. But of course, INFJs, like, we don't see that, but the things haven't come out on the surface, but we still know, we still see it. And you can see pictures of us of INFJs, and we're just like, like, you don't know what I've seen. Like, there's a whole different story happening under the surface here, and it doesn't look like anybody else is noticing it. Am I imagining it? Yeah. But anyway, I think that I think it's good to expand yourself and learn how to do some different, like, I'm learning from some ESTJs that I've been around lately, and you can learn stuff, and it helps you also to appreciate the other types and everything to get into this. And the other point that I wanted to make with the driving example that I made is that like I said, if a woman does not have this map in her brain, she still can use all the landmarks and all that sort of thing and everything, and that every type, I think, is going to have a different way of typing and a different way that they do it. Like, for example, being an INFJ, I get a certain feeling around each type, so like that's a huge clue to me if I'm actually around the person, and I can feel the people's essence, and then I'll look at my collection of photos of that type that I got off the internet, and look at their eyes and everything and be like, oh yes, that's their essence. Now, is that like this person? No, they don't feel like that. And this is a big clue for me, but I don't think that that's going to be necessarily a big clue for all the other types. So, and I've really enjoyed watching videos by a certain INFP, because he's talking more about, of course, I'm sure they're employing a lot of NI also, with that being their sixth function, but, a lot of NE type of things. And I've incorporated those into my techniques, and it's really interesting and fascinating. And so there's more than one way to do this. And I'm going to try to, share some different things from both NI and NE, and just different things that you can do. Some people are not in favor of the different types and stuff. Well, I will say that INFJs, because we almost don't have TE, and that's kind of a categorizing function that categorizes, we'll more tend to have everybody in their own categories. So for us, the idea of 16 different categorizations is kind of a relief. It's like, oh, it's only 16, and I think that I heard that the Carl Jung that started the MBTI was an INFJ, so it's kind of like having a Sudoku at the beginning, that you already have a few numbers in there, and then you can kind of go from there. You don't have to start from the beginning. I would say that, and you can also have a grid that you can fill in, and it's not necessarily that you're going to, it's not like you start out and it's all filled in. You know what to basically expect. Say somebody's an ISFJ, you figured out they're an ISFJ, and you know pretty much where they're coming from, more than anything, in the cognitive sense. And so you can go filling in the boxes. Yes, they're like a lot of ISFJs in this, but they're different in that, and they're kind of like that, and kind of like that in this area, and and you can go actually appreciating and studying them a lot more easily that way. Also, there's a lot of people, principally FI people, and I would say FI of people that have FI in the top 4 functions, that are diametrically, like, not diametrically, but probably vehemently against the whole thing of categorizing people, because FI deals so much in being unique. But believe me, if you have somebody's type, you know somebody's type, you're able to appreciate their uniqueness a lot more. For example, if somebody sees me and somebody does something and I say something assertive, you know, appropriately assertive for the situation, maybe they're not going to think anything of it. But then, you know, an INFJ, and that doesn't come to us naturally, and how much you have to develop before you can do that sort of thing, then they understand more about me as a person. Because they have context. And that's something that I really want to emphasize when you are trying to type people or study people, whatever. You really always have to take context into account. Context is a huge factor in this. Our neighbor is out there in the snow. What is he doing? We very rarely get snow here, so it's kind of a big deal. So now I want to move on to, also along with context, another thing you need to consider is clusters. You don't want to, you know, type people just based on one thing. You just want to combine as many different things as you can and see how many of them line up. And only after you get at least 4 or 5 do you want to really consider thinking that your theory might be true, you know. So let's see. So the difference between MBTI and Socionics, which is, it's actually makes a big difference in typing people, as far as I've experienced it. And I have not studied MBTI or Socionics myself personally, like on the website or reading books or whatever. I'm only aware of it from videos that people who have studied it have made. So, but from that vantage point, basically there are 2 big differences that I wanted to mention that have affected me anyway, and will affect what it is that I'm going to talk about. And that is MBTI and Socionics both have the same 8 functions. They're still the same types. But MBTI, usually when you see a chart and you look up like the functions of a type, they'll only put the first 4. Why is that? Because they say that, according to the way I understand it, that the functions are listed in order of strength, so therefore the first 4 are the only ones that are really going to show. The other ones are just like so weak they're not really even worth mentioning. Whereas according to Socionics, the functions are listed in order of preference, which makes a big difference. And according to that, like the 8th function is one you're going to see when you first meet someone, because they're putting it out there to be polite. 6th function, I've read practically like possibly the entire personality is based upon it, and I think that it is. 7th function is the weak one, and you know, so on and so forth. So since I saw a video and I didn't realize that there was a difference or anything, but it explained how it's called type tips, and I think I've probably forgotten some details over time and I probably need to review it, but it was just a real big eye-opener for me, because it was explaining how each type uses all 8 functions. And since I started using that, I mean, before that I could only type maybe half of the, like it only worked like half the time, and I would have given up on it. But I found that the videos on this channel, and from then on, like I was able to type. So according to me, I feel like that is more accurate, or at least at the very least it works better for me. The other big difference between MBTI and Socionics is that, well, they have matching jackets, him and his wife. Okay, anyway, what are they doing? I heard that it's actually safe to be nosy and have nosy neighbors. Burglars will not target you if your neighbors are involved with each other. So I am doing a community duty watching my neighbors. Anyway, this was from a burglar that had reformed. He stayed away from neighborhood watches. Anyway, so the other big difference in Socionics is that, what was I saying? Okay, they have the same types, but on the introverts, they change the J to a P and the P to a J. The main impact of this is that on me is that on Socionics.com, if you look, there's a relationship chart, and it's so cool. You can look up any type together with any other type, and you can see a description of the typical interaction between them, like the impressions each one has of the other. And it's not, you know, unique to like mine with a ESFJ is not only the one that's between me and the ESFJ, but it happens. Every type has that type of personality with some other type. You know what I'm saying? But it's so fascinating and so interesting, and that can also help you type people to see, like, if you know what types one person is, then you can kind of maybe figure out what that other person is, because you've seen how they relate to each other and everything. Of course, if you're there, it kind of changes the interaction a little bit, but I guess it could work with you really well. No, I've used it with other people. So anyway, that's the main differences there. And if you want to hear the reasons that they have the P and the J different, it's just kind of two different perspectives. And I guess this is kind of good to know, because it'll kind of help you be a little more observant about people and just, think about these things. But according to Socionics, as far as I can see it, and the P, for example, like you have an INTP, they are like pretty distracted. They'll go from one thing to another thing to another thing. And according to MBTI, I'm a J, which means I'm really focused. I'm not going to be distracted so easily. I'm just really focused on my goal. But then when you look at Socionics, they look at the P and the J from a different perspective. And their perspective is that P is perceiving. Well, it always does mean perceiving, but in their sense, it's hard for perceivers to make their mind up about something or to decide about something, and they just keep watching to just take in more and more and more information, and just maybe take in that last little piece of information before they make their mind up. And perceivers, of course, they make their decisions that they make are more accurate. The judges can decide right away, but they change their mind more rapidly. And there are advantages and disadvantages to both of them. The perceivers, a greater percentage of their decisions are accurate, but it's not any more decisions that are accurate than the judges. I don't know if that makes sense, but in any case, the judges will right away decide about things, and well, you should do this, or da 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 da, or no, that wasn't good, or I'm not meaning to be like an accusing kind of thing, but that they always are accusing or whatever. But I'm just saying that the judges are like, they'll just make up their mind about anything. Just they can do it really fast. And that is what judger means in that sense. So on the introverts, only you have to change the P to a J and the J to a P when you're going to Socionics things. Basically, what I've seen online, I may be wrong, but it seems like most people just stick with the MBTI names, even if they are talking about Socionics things, although sometimes I see that the way they're talking about a type, it's not the MBTI type, it's the Socionics type, and it's just one of those things. So everybody's heard of MBTI, therefore most people haven't heard of Socionics, so people, I think, maybe mix them together, or I don't really know how it happens, but anyway, moving on from there. So, I mean, for an INFJ, the MBTI, like typing somebody, is only really a means to an end if we're actually going to study them. You know what I mean? Although, like, if I'm in a parking lot, see somebody walk by and it's like, look at that, it's an ENFP, But I'm not going to study them or anything. Just certain types will sort of jump out at me, or certain manifestations of types, because there's a lot of different. I mean, boy, when you get into cultures and all this stuff, it's really interesting. They'll take different forms that you didn't expect. It's really interesting. Dog, what do you want? Also, INFJs are only good at what we care about. So if I don't care about what type somebody is and it didn't jump out at me, I'm probably never going to type them. So, although, I mean, I could think of an INFJ that's just really into that, so he probably cares about typing everybody, and he probably types everybody, And after a certain point, I'm sure that it's not really that difficult anymore after you've seen a certain amount of people and done it a certain amount of times. From there, I want to move on to some different factors to consider when you're typing people, things that can make a difference. One difference is the birth order, and of course this also has to do with culture, because in some cultures the older children help take care of the younger children. Other cultures it's not so much that way, but that can really affect how somebody behaves. And I'm not saying it's just like a whole game changer, but it can be pretty can be pretty different. It can definitely be a factor. Another thing that you need to consider when you're typing people is, or just a tip, these are more like kind of tips, I guess. Do not assume other people are like you. You know what I mean? Everybody assumes other people are like them. It's just something that we naturally do, but don't assume that, because you know, it's not a matter of what you've noticed, because like, we're human. There's only so many things you can do and so many things you can say and so many actions, and you know, we're all human, so we all have pretty much the same actions and do pretty much the same things, but it's a matter of interpreting them. What is behind it when that person does it? You can't assume that what's behind it when they do it is the same as what's behind it when you do it, and that's where you're missing it. It's not necessarily what you notice, it's how you interpret it, whether you're interpreting it correctly or not. And I'll just give a really kind of simple example. I had a friend, she's a woman, and she had a brother, and her brother, she told me, he would always like do this thing, like when they were playing games or like when they were doing something, he would always do a certain thing, and she took it as an affront, as an insult, being a woman. And so I explained to her, no, he's wanting to interact with you, like he's wanting to be friends with, like, you know, bond with you. This is something he's doing to be friendly. And I mean, that's the thing between guys. If a guy ignores you or like doesn't do anything, then, you know, to another guy, then that's like an insult, because it's like, well, I don't even take you seriously enough to, you know, challenge you or anything. But if you're challenging another guy, that means it's a compliment, you know, because you're taking them seriously, you know. And so that's what her brother was doing with her, and it's not necessarily you know, a thing that you would do to an enemy with guys between themselves. It can be, but it's a lot of times it's not, and it's just how they relate to each other. And so he was assuming that she was like him, and she was assuming he was like her, and so they had this huge misunderstanding. And she came back and told me later that she just took my advice and just like did it back to him and started interacting with him on this, and she said, oh, we get along great now. So that's the thing, you know, you can see it, but just because you see it doesn't mean that you understand it, and you cannot assume that you know the way the other person did something, or you know what it is that they meant by it. That is one of the main things to remember when you're typing people. Another thing that can make a difference is the Enneagram type. For example, I'm a 7, and according to the figures that I've seen, that's like, what, 1.5% of INFJs of people are INFJs, 1.3% of INFJs are 7, so that's like, what, 1 in 10,000 people. If you met other INFJs and everything, and I've had somebody tell me this before, well, you don't seem like the INFJs that I know, and it's like, you know, so that could throw you off. It's an Enneagram, like the INFJ part, that is your cognitive functions, and the Enneagram is your emotional functions. And then there's also the instinctual variance. There's sexual, social, and self-preservation. Each person has one that's stronger and another one that's not as strong, and the other one's not there. I'm a social. I think I'm the only social in my family, and so sexual is intense, social is social, and self-preservation is cautious. And I think I'm the only SO in my family, so I'm just always like, why are you guys being so intense about everything? But anyway, yeah. Oh, I just want to mention here, INFJs, we can deflect people studying us, by the way. At least with the NI that we use to study people, which is like a radar. So if you have NI and you find yourself trying to type somebody, and every time you just start to try to figure it out, your mind goes, and these just kind of always, and your mind just goes someplace else immediately every time after you try to study them. That's a major clue. That could be an INFJ. Here is another clue, and I'm going to stop the video in a minute because I need to attend to the dog, but I will be back. It's called careerplanner.com, and this is a good clue, especially when you're getting started. You can look at the incidence of personality types, so you can see what the percentages of them are, and so, you know, you can kind of play your numbers, right? So you have in men, 16.4% of men are ISTJs. Well, that's a pretty good number to start with. I mean, you have a pretty high possibility of being right. Right? You know, you can look and see, well, are they an ISTJ? And there's a pretty good possibility they might be, right? And then ESTJs are 11.2%. So those are the two main types that you find in men. And then women, 19% 19.4% of women are ISFJs. That is a really important clue to know, right? And ESFJs are 16.9%. So that's even a lot more to work with than with the men. So that's a good thing to know when you're starting to type people, just generally. And let me cover this one more point here, and then we'll finish the rest in another video piece. But look at the environment that you're in. Again, this is a contextual kind of thing. If you're in the gym, you're going to see more of certain types. I remember I went up to Chimney Rock, climbing up there, and it's a nice outdoor nature kind of place. ESTPs love it, and I saw like 10 ESTPs up there, and I was like, did I see that one before? No, that's a different one. And I was like, ESTPs popping out everywhere, a lot more than you normally see. And so you just have to, you know, if you're in an artistic place, you're going to see certain types. If you're at the bank, you'll see certain types. At the, you know, the librarians a lot of times are ISTJs, or INTJs, you know, this sort of thing. At the every place that you go, you have a lot of times different, a greater concentration of different types. If you're at the mechanics, you're a lot more likely to run into an ISTP, you know what I'm saying? So there are things like that. I will return.